I'm here with Gabby Reece. Gabby, you've been around the block in all kinds of different things. You have your own world of experience as a professional volleyball player. You're married to a complete lunatic, Laird Hamilton, who is someone I admire as well. I want to focus today on just limiting belief discussion. I went to an XBT event with you, and it was unbelievable just what I learned as far as how our mindset really dictates so much of what we do. And I want to turn it over to you and kind of with some opening statement as far as mindset is concerned, as far as limiting belief, and then we can just kind of dive deeper. Now, I'm pretty stoked to announce too that for the last couple of years, I have been working with Thrive Market on creating my own product with them. And we decided a couple years back that a good nut butter would be the perfect product to team up on. So my nut butter has officially launched. So there's a couple of different ones. There's a macadamia nut, there's a cinnamon Brazil nut, which is sweet and tastes amazing, that's sweetened with allulose. And there's a chocolate hazelnut flavor, which is amazing. And they're going to abide by my rules too. There's a few different nuts in them, and then there's some allulose, and there's some salt. There's no fillers, there's no weird stuff. And the cool thing is if you get them through Thrive Market using that link down below, you'll save 30% off your entire grocery order, which also includes my nut butters. Plus you get a $60 free gift when you use that link. So you use that link down below, and then you can find the nut butters there on the website, and you can try whatever different flavor you want. I highly recommend you check them out. I created them in tandem with Thrive Market, so what you're getting is literally what I formulated and what I made. So definitely check them out. And if you're already a Thrive Market member, I'll put a link down below in the description that's specifically for a Thrive Market member that goes directly to that page as well.
I think, first of all, I really appreciated that you came and you went straight into pool training, which I think the water is a place. Nature has definitely a lot of environments that teach you objectively about your mindset. And I would say that, maybe you can sit here and you've experienced me more in that moment. It was sort of like I was just sort of facilitating the training environment. But if you followed me throughout my life as an athlete and in some other situations, it's that mindset has had so many different personalities. I had probably an interesting and very different mindset and not uncommon as a young female athlete versus how I sit here with you today as somebody who's then added another 30-something years of training myself, been around a lot of other athletes, coached a lot of athletes, had kids, and shifted that mindset. So mindset, really, it's how we frame it. It's how we define it. And it's so interesting that that's just, you can draw a straight line to how life is. It is, however, we perceive it to be. And so how do we get a non-limiting mindset so that we can do anything that we're trying to pursue? So you might see me right at this moment in one specific way, but I will tell you it's been a journey to a lot of different mindsets.
One of the things that kind of stuck with me a lot because it resonates with how I discuss even nutrition is the desire to breathe, the need to breathe, right? And it was like a metaphor for life. And what I'm alluding to is, when you're in the water, I don't know what percent it is, at what point the need to breathe kind of kicks in psychologically as far as CO2 augmentation and that, but it's long before you actually need to breathe. And that is such a metaphor for life in a lot of different ways. So I took that to the bank. That was a huge, huge piece for me, especially when it comes down to how I talk about nutrition and how I do even relatively extreme things with nutrition and what the body is capable of. But I think the overarching theme there was, your limiting belief, right? In this happening at various cascades, right? Various, almost super physiological levels that you think are completely out of your control, all the way down to what is in your control. And I know Laird is very big on this, but this is something that you've had these principles sort of in your life as long as I've known of who you are. Mm-hmm. How does this translate into everyday life for you? Can you explain to the audience a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, and I think also, to be really clear, sometimes I think we can't really develop that belief until we touch the curtain a few times. I can't expect you, for example, in nutrition or to come in the water to know on the second drill, oh, actually, I don't need air. This is CO2. So there's something to be said for a little trial and error. Like, oh, I'm not really hungry. It's gonna pass. I'm gonna be okay. You know, and so I want to start by saying that it's being willing to fail a few times, to touch the curtain and also understand your envelope. And it's easy once you kind of know some of the parameters or you have a sense of it to be like, oh, you know what, I'm okay. So that's true to life. Like, I'm a parent, you're a parent, and even, you know, something goes on with a first kid and you think, oh no, we're at the edge here, whatever that edge is. And you realize by the next kid or the kid after or a different experience that usually we're a lot further away from whatever this inevitable doomsday that we think is happening than we realize. But I don't know that we can know that intuitively, which I think is important for all of us to learn, unless we go through it a little bit. So for example, military training, sometimes you can train the guys all you want, but until they go to battle once or twice, they're not really going to have that reference. So for me, it's having lived long enough and trying to learn each time I'm in those really uncomfortable situations and say, okay, what's really happening? Not indulging on how I felt. Like, oh my gosh, I was so stressed out in this. It's like, okay, what was really happening? And trying to learn from that. And I try to do that in all areas, in my business life, in my parental life, in my romantic life, in my friendship life, and certainly in my training life. And you do it enough times, and also sitting with, ooh, this is really uncomfortable, and being okay with that and getting a relationship with that. And certainly I've learned a lot, because Laird has a relationship with discomfort. I always joke, like if we went on a bike ride, I might ask how far, because I'm going to start kind of navigating my energy. He's never going to ask. He'll just go full throttle the whole time, and okay, when we get there, we get there. So I've lived with somebody who also embraces a relationship with feeling out of sorts or uncomfortable. And that's probably not my nature. I can stay stoic, but I'm still going to look for the path of least resistance. And that also comes in the mindset. Why would I continue on with a mindset that isn't supporting me in the most kind of productive way?
It's interesting because it almost flies in the face of any kind of conventional training to begin with. Like we always say, like with the military operators that I work with, like you never rise to the occasion, you always default to your lowest level of training. And you cannot develop that low level of training flirting with real danger. You're always in a safe place. And that's the issue that I have with training. And that's not a problem, but it is a problem when it comes down to when hits the fan, because you're never actually putting yourself there unless you occasionally allow yourself to actually flirt with that real danger or flirt with touching the curtain and seeing what's going to happen. And that's only going to happen in real life. And that's the difference between a combat veteran and someone that went through OTC and has, you know, amazing marks throughout training, but has never actually seen combat.
Yeah, and that's think about testing a race car. You don't test it and then go, hey, great, let's slap 10 more cars on there and you guys go for it. It's by itself. You're fine-tuning, you're doing your thing. So it does have the opportunity for optimum performance. But to your point, whether we like it or not, we're never going to be prepared fully. And the only way we get those skills is, unfortunately, sometimes, especially in something dangerous like military training, until we've seen it, we've heard it, we felt it, and then we have this opportunity to respond accordingly. Maybe the first time we respond, this much, and then, by the third time we know how to respond in the appropriate level so that we can conserve energy, be efficient, be emotionally clear, make good decisions. And that's really also why I like the water, because it is still safe, but it can feel threatening.
Yeah, and you have no choice but to submit into a place where the only thing that you can focus on is your internal demons, your internal battle, and that little voice inside your head, because anyone that is a responsible, reasonable person knows they're not going to win. You're not going to win in the water. So, and that's something where, like, candidly, my struggles were much more in the shallow end, and just to give context, I can show footage, but where much more length related was difficult for me versus deep, because deep, I knew the time, I knew the distance, but when it was length, I wanted to get through it as fast as I could. I wanted to fight it.
Well, you muscle things. Look at you, right? Yeah. So you're like, I got a gear. I always say I got hammers all day long in the pool. They come in, they hammer, yeah. And it works great. But someone gave me this like a emotional metaphor, but it's like, cool, but we're washing the windows. So distance is washing the windows, and that is a different tool. And it's also sometimes sitting in that and saying, I just want to finish is the exact opposite of the response, which is like, okay, task completion. I've got to sit in this. And the more I can downregulate and relax and be like, okay, I have a shot at it. And so when we muscle through things, hammer through, go through, hammer down, when we're used to that gearing, the water can really be an interesting place.
It definitely can.
Us.
So if you take sort of, let's say, Laird's personality, which is, I don't care how far, I don't care how long, I'm just going to go 100%. And you sort of mesh it with your, let's call it conventional training wisdom, in experience, where you say, I like to have something somewhat pragmatic so I understand like how I need to pace, how I need to set this up. I think that gives you a perfect recipe for why you guys are so perfect together, right? It's like he deep down probably needs that a little bit because it grounds him, because he's probably the kind of person where if he didn't have that grounding, he would probably just keep going and keep going and keep going. Yeah. And maybe that's one of those things where when you guys together actually create something that's even more powerful, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
If you you have an interesting look on your face.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to hear your question.
Okay. So if you were to take sort of this entire metaphor that we're talking about here, how does this translate into someone that isn't necessarily a performance-minded person, but someone that is lost in the daily shuffle, trying to just, I don't know, get to the next day, get themselves healthier, get themselves in the gym, make different nutritional choices. Even when you look at the context of XPT, you look at the context, like all kinds of different people that were there. Different performance mindsets, people that maybe weren't even performance minded to begin with, but they're all getting something out of that. How does this translate for a regular person?
Well, first I want to say that, with Laird and I, there's a couple things in there. We do it very, very differently, obviously, but Laird, when it comes down to it, will be the most calculated and methodical person that there is, right? Never cavalier, never foolhardy. So I think that's really important to decipher, because maybe you wouldn't see it. Obviously his work capacity might be bigger than some of us, but it's still risk averse.
There's a method to it.
Big time.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're not gonna, that expression, right?
Yeah.
There's old pilots and bold pilots, but there's no old, bold pilots.
Yep.
And so you have to be serious you can't huck yourself. You can till you're 23, right? But you can't this long. So there's that. But what I will say is it actually shows up more in our everyday life, where I'm kind of an emotional through line and Laird's going like this. That's what makes him creative. That's what makes him adventurous. He leads with his heart. So we balance each other that way. But for the everyday person, what I'll say, and I've said this with XPT, is that all we're trying to do is say, where are you? The thing is, the everyday person, this is something I've really learned a lot in the last, say, 5 years, is, first of all, we're just starting at our level. So if we're going to lift right now, I'm not going to look at you and compare myself to you. I'm going to say, okay, where is Gabby at? What's my starting baseline? What's my strategy? What do I want to improve? And then, okay, wow, I'm 3% better in the last 2 weeks than I was. So that to me is successful. So it's reminding people we're not using other people as gauges. We're using them as inspiration or learning, but we're not comparing ourselves first. Second, it's this idea of, how do we take away the things that are stopping us? Because what I've learned through performance and working with people like yourself and other people is I actually don't want to add a ton more on your plate to make you better. We want to take away the things that are keeping you from success. And so there's a time to add, but it's not if we're saying, hey, downtrodden, getting, just barely getting through work and trying to figure out how to navigate food and movement. So let's say this week, what's our worst eating habit? Okay, can you not do that? Or, okay, you smoke 20 cigarettes. Can you smoke 10? And it's not even saying to people, stop smoking. Of course I want you to stop smoking. But if I'm working with you, the individual, it's for me taking away those obstacles. It's getting you to say, if this is my level, when I get here, that's a success. You might be here, but I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about me. And working from that place. But also to say to people, it doesn't matter how much information you have in the world, and even a level of desire, if you don't have a strategy and a plan put in place and a practice, it doesn't mean anything. You can have it all here, and especially now. I can watch your videos on YouTube and be like, okay, I know what to do. Thomas just told me exactly what to do. But if I don't have a plan, a practice, it doesn't mean anything. And I really like to decipher that for people, which is like, you can know, but if you don't have that practice in place, it really doesn't mean anything. And that's for me, and that's for you in your practice. And I think that that's really, really the difference. So it's trying to not make it feel overwhelming to people and get them to define success is only going to be based on their reality and what they're doing, and not like, but I don't my body fat's, you know, not like Thomas's. It's like, we're not talking about him, we're talking about you. And so in performance, I try when I work with people to be like, hey, listen, we're just doing the best we can. So calm down if I gave you a goal and you didn't make it. That's not what's happening. So it's just trying to get them in touch with it, but also I'm not gonna really deal with excuses. So what I always say is grace and full accountability. They've got to live part and parcel. They have to live together. So we have to give ourselves those grace so we can stay inspired and not let, I'm no good, keep us. But you know what? You got to take full ownership of it. And it's like, how do we live in those two spaces simultaneously?
It's almost this art of elimination, like by looking at, we live in a world of like, I call them optimized bros, like where we're just like, we're trying to optimize by adding so many little things, so much minutia to the point where we're paralyzing ourselves. Look at the light for this long, do this for this long, eat this for this long, eat this, do this, which is all great. And it's great for quick clickbaity little things, but it's not practical because the last thing that we all need is more stuff added onto our plate. I love the idea of, it's almost refinement versus optimization. It's empowering someone, saying, you've already got the goods, you've got enough of this flooding it, let's focus on your strong suit. So I say, feed the stallion, starve the pony, right?
Yeah, and it's like building a house. If I don't have a good foundation, why are we talking about the faucet handles and like the really cute light fixtures that I want to put in the house? You don't even have a foundation. So let's get first to basics. Now, someone like you, we could say, all right, let's get crazy and get super detailed and go, incrementally. Perfect. But for most people that have so much to navigate, they don't have time, they don't know what to do, they're not motivated, they're trying to deal with the grocery store and the cost and, time to move and time to be with their family and stress and cortisol and all these things. It's like, hey, let's just focus on the foundation first. We can get into the light fixtures later. And I think in a world, to your point, where everybody's like, I measured this and I did that. It's like, who cares? Yep. Like, you're not even sleeping. Like, why are you talking to me about your, heart rate variability? What's that got to do with anything? So I think there's a part of me that's, first of all, my generation. And my personality, I'm probably over practical. And it's not that, I think sometimes it's more unusual as a female, because I think coming through sports, I always loved like male coaches, but my favorite female coach delivered information in just a super matter-of-fact way. And so I always thought, I'd like to embody that. It's like, hey, this is just information. I'm here to love you and support you, and I'm just giving you information. I'm not gonna listen to excuses, but I'm here to help you and do that. And so all of this technology and like hack this and do that, I'm like, hacks only work if you're doing everything else right. Then you might just get a little bonus because you have this hack.
And at the end of the day, oftentimes the amount of energy you put into trying to execute that hack takes away from the core fundamentals of what you need to be better. And taking all this is an interesting conversation to ask about how your mindset has shifted going from professional athlete to doing what you do now, but also the struggle that comes with it. I had Apollo Ono here last week and we talked a little bit about sport divorce, right? Like it's exactly what I'd never heard the term before.
It's a great name. Yeah,
but
great.
Basically the great divorce of him breaking up with speed skating and realizing that, hey, like I'm on to other things. And I think everyone handles that in a different way, right? Because identity is wrapped up in that. And it's a conversation that can be had whether you're an athlete, whether you're an executive, whether you're a mom, whatever. As we were talking before we were filming about even my wife and her identity being wrapped up as a mom and how that frustrates her and how she has to break out of that and how she is breaking out of that. So when your entire identity was probably, I didn't know you then, but performance minded, this, that, the other, like how was that divorce? How did that transpire? What changed?
So I'll be really honest. Based on my hierarchical needs from a childhood to a young adult, which is when I became a professional athlete, was all about survival. And so, for example, when I picked up really more seriously sports my junior and senior year of high school, then I got an opportunity to go to college on a scholarship. And I went to college on a scholarship because I loved playing and I loved learning. And I really liked who I was when I worked hard, but it was also because it could pay for college. And then I fell in love with the sport. Then I got the opportunity to play as a professional, but I will tell you that I never married my sport that way. I never did. Because I always was a person who, because I needed to take care of myself. That was what was happening in my life. And so I was always here. I was going to work as hard or harder than anybody on my team because I also knew I was fortunate to have the opportunity. I recognized that even then at 17, 18 years old, that I was really fortunate and that I would take care of the opportunity. And by working hard, that's how I could do it. But I always had my eyes on who am I today? And who am I trying to become and where do I think I'm going to be? So weirdly, and then in college I started modeling because it was an opportunity. I wasn't married to it. I just was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. So I had always a kind of a dual identity. And maybe I never bought any of it. I never bought it. I never was like, even Laird says this. He's like, I'm not a surfer. I'm Laird, and one of the things I do is surf. And I grew up in the Caribbean, and so I don't know if by kind of living in that environment, you weren't indoctrinated so much about you're the CEO, you're this, you're that. And so it was easier. But I was also always being diversified because also, by the way, beach volleyball is a very small sport.
Yeah. And
it's a small platform. So if you want to live and die on that, and the survivalist in me was like, not a good idea. If I was an NBA player, cool. Yeah. Or, tennis, women's tennis, that's a platform that you could really just dump it all into. Beach volleyball, it was like, yeah, no, you better dance around because this is not going to really support you in the long run. So I would say I had that easier. Interesting.
Yeah, you look at so many people and they wrap up their identity in whatever, right? So I've struggled with this myself, right? And there's even something online they call audience capture, right? Where you end up being captured by the audience that you have and you ultimately create an identity based upon that, right? People know me as Thomas DeLauer, as the XYZ nutrition guy, the low carb guy, the fasting guy, whatever.
Yeah, the ripped guy.
Yeah, it's whatever label you want to put on it. And that has just been a recipe for so much headache and heartache for me personally, because then you are constantly striving to live to a certain identity, afraid to break out of that. If you break out of that, what happens? So you just do it anyway. And it can hurt a lot of people. And I can speak for myself personally that that's difficult, but then there's a lot of people that, maybe their identity is wrapped up in their career. Maybe their identity is wrapped up in trying to achieve something, or, the self-deprecating negative talk that continues them right where they are. Do you have any insight or pragmatic things that people could do to say, hey, I'm not going to be married to this? Yeah. How does someone that has not been raised in a way to have sort of that peripheral view develop that?
Listen, it might be a little corny. I think it's a spiritual quest. It's detaching from. And the problem is the more sort of exaggerated we are in a certain way, I'm 6'3", and when I was younger, it's okay, you look a certain way. It's almost harder, right? because you get it, it's so kind of obvious that people, it's like so easy for them to be like, oh, you're that tall volleyball player that da da da. But what I would say is that I think for me, I thought, oh, I would like to experience life from the inside out. So what do I want to do? What is inspiring me? What do I really like? Not what am I supposed to do? What's the expectation? Who am I supposed to please? And the one good thing about kind of not growing up with a structured family for me was that was never even built in. It was sort of like, okay, good luck, get out there. And so my whole life I was led by my internal voice. And so what I would say to people is, it is hard to do, but it is your life. And it does go very quickly. And by the way, you could do it right or wrong, and everyone's gonna have an opinion anyway. And so why not satisfy yourself and be led by your own inner voice? Because I believe when we can have enough quiet space to really hear that, we always arrive at the place that makes us feel really good. It may not be the place that gets us the most attention or the most money or any of that stuff that the world tells us is the complete definition of success, but it will land us in relationships that are rich and real. It'll land us in businesses that reflect genuinely who we are and what problems we want to get up and solve each day. And if we're here to try to please other people, it's completely impossible. So to develop that and to trust that. And if anyone comes in your sphere, in your close sphere, that is in opposition, then they shouldn't be there. And I think it has to transcend everything. And what I mean by that is, I'm a 53-year-old woman with 3 daughters and a husband, blah, blah, I'm all these things. It's like your wife going horseback riding. No, I'm this person. I'm this being. And so, yeah, I'm aware of like how the world might view me, but ultimately I'm still just trying to look out of my eyes and go towards the things that excite me and drive me and that I want to do, because it's all hard work. You're going to get up every day and bust your ass, and you're going to be in relationships. So what do you want that to look like? Because it is your life. And to know that sometimes that's more quiet, right? It isn't like, blah, or you have more followers, or like, yay. Sometimes it's quiet, but it's so rich and real and still and meaningful that if you can really touch with that, and you do that once or twice in your life, you'll trust that more and more. And there's nothing that is a substitute for that. Plus, it's all unsustainable anyway. It's completely, let's look at Madonna, for example. I mean, there's a hold on to try to recapture. It's completely unsustainable. Let's take the most incredibly well-known, wealthy, powerful person today at this moment. In 25 years, basically no one's gonna care. So why are we chasing that? It is unsustainable, period.
That is a very interesting point and very, very valid. You think, you have this, what I've heard it called the radio voice, right? Like if you turn off everything for a second, you just listen to your voice. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's noisy. It's very hard to quiet that voice, right? Because that voice seems to sort of echo everything that you've sort of entertained in the recent past, right? What you see on social media, what you've watched, whatever. And being able to take some time to actually just stop and listen to that voice, let that voice quiet down and let your true gut talk versus what's kind of in this almost prefrontal cortex that's just kind of telling you what to do for pure survival. And if you look at, social media, you're gonna have a distorted view on what pure survival is. You're gonna have this entirely different facade of what you fundamentally think is survival compared to what your core values are and like what you need for true survival of your identity and your own passions, right? And yes, to a certain degree, there's facades we have to put on. We have to, go to work. We have to put our pants on, and we have to go make money, do whatever.
Yeah.
I understand
I have
that.
Mascara on right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Facade.
exactly. Mm-hmm. But I also think sooner that we can also come to terms, as you mentioned, there's things that you do, there's opportunities that you take, and those are just flashes in the pan. They don't have to be who you are as an actual person. And it almost, what I'm gathering from this is there's almost a little bit of amnesty that's granted sometimes when people say, well, I hate what I do, I'm not happy with what I hate my job, I hate this and that. Do you actually hate your job, or do you hate that you're not listening to your gut? Like, is it actually your job, or is it that you're not just following that inner voice that's trying to tell you not necessarily do something different, but maybe capitalize on other opportunities or seize the day somewhere else and do something different? And I think sometimes people think that it means they have to throw everything else to the wind. And I use my wife again as an example. She does such a great job of, I look at her sometimes and I say, you're the horse girl. And I'm not a horse person. I like horses, but I'm not a horse person. So I don't fully understand, but I know it's what makes her happy. And I look at that situation sometimes and it can be frustrating sometimes because I don't get it. But she does a really good job of saying, like, well, just because I'm a horse person doesn't mean that I'm only a horse person. Like, there's other things that I do. And she looks at it much more like you, where she says, like, yeah, this is just one piece of my life. And I can put those pants on and put those boots on and be that person, but then I can also be this person. And I think we put these labels on ourselves where we feel like we have to brand ourselves, we have to be a specific way. And it's interesting to talk to someone who's a professional athlete that didn't brand themselves. Like, everyone tries to be something. It's so difficult to explain, but everybody wants to dress a certain way, look a certain way, because branding is cool. And you're almost labeled two-faced if you're, multifaceted and you can do these different things. And I think for people that are just kind of stuck in this same rut, they don't have another wardrobe. They think that's their only wardrobe.
Well, and I'm going to put an adjunct onto all this too. I wanted to be really, really good, and I was very competitive, but I had a lot of things I wanted to do in my life. And I will say this, I think in sport or even in business, if you want to be the best, the very best. And what's interesting is now you hear, like Kevin Kelly talks about, don't strive to be the best, strive to be the only. But let's just say in your thinking, I want to be the best. You have to give up a lot. You have to give up kind of your whole life. So I'll sort of bolt that on because that's a different mindset than someone like me who's like, I'm competitive, I'm going to train super hard, I want to be great, but I have a whole life I know I want to live. And the people who dump their entire selves, like a tech startup guy who's going to work 20 hours a day for 10 years, they're going to give up their whole lives to do that. Yeah. And there are athletes like that too. The problem is, again, the survivalist in me goes, the price at the end of that, I don't want to pay that.
Yeah.
Because that's your life.
Yeah.
Those are your relationships. And that also means when that's over, now what? So I think it's also an important differentiating mark because I think in order to do the other stuff, that's what it takes.
And I think that sometimes it takes people experiencing that, collecting that data from that, understanding that there's sacrifices that usually, we're not talking the fun sacrifices like I'm gonna not go to that party and go to bed early. We're talking about the sacrifices of building close, intimate relationships that are actually the true, like, weight-bearing things in your life. And that's not to say that it can't be done. There are professional athletes that manage to do that. But you look at triathletes, such a tremendous example, the amount of time that goes into that. I mean, we're talking, 14 hours a day of training in a lot of cases. And there's jokes about, triathlons being widowmakers. This is kind of like what it is because they're basically dead. They basically don't exist because they're just training constantly. And on one hand, it's easy for social media to glorify that and respect that, right? You're gonna, Goggins your way through something. I have no problem with Goggins, but like people take that and they say, okay, well, this is how I want to live my life. And next thing you know, they're training all hours of the day that they're not at work, and what happens to their family. And it's a very interesting sort of dynamic that we've created for ourselves by glorifying performance. Because I think performance needs an asterisk by it too. It's like, what do you want to actually be performing in?
And what is the definition of true performance, right? So what is that? Like, I'm trying to perform till I die. And that means in all these facets of my life, not like for not really for 15 years in volleyball. So I'm trying my best, I'm good and not good sometimes, in all these areas to really be high performance. I'm trying to be a high performance wife, and in my work and in my training and as a mom. And so it's just a little different. And I also will say, maybe, again, because I'm a mom, the joke is like you have a new baby, you're tired, and you're like, I just need to be alone for a minute, right? And you go out your driveway and you say, I'll be back in 30 minutes, and your guy has the baby. The minute you drive out the driveway, I'm talking about a little baby, you're like, I have to get home. It's inside you, right? So I also think that customarily, not always, there's always exceptions, I think men and women battle something really also different, right? Men, it's sort of like, I have to get stuff and bring it home and create value this way. And women we feel guilty, and we have all these other little things, especially if you choose to have children. So I think we're measuring things also differently because we have to think ahead, right? That's why we're always a little more, fearful or anxious or worried about this or that, because we're always looking way ahead. Where customarily, I think you guys can be like, we're doing this, So I think it's a smaller differentiating point. But again, I didn't feel the need for the outside. Does it feel good when someone's like, I like you? Yeah, of course it does, Yeah. But for me, if you want to talk about real performance, it's almost getting to a place where you're like, I cannot care. I can really detach myself and know that Byron Katie said once, what you think of me is none of my business. And that is where I'd like to live. I want to show up as what they would consider a good person, whatever that means, an empathetic, a kind, a hardworking person, an honest person. But at the end of the day, if I'm answering to myself and, my gods, at the end of the day, whether you think I'm great or not, it's like, how do I get there now? That's high performance for me.
So in the context of looking ahead and kind of thinking about that, how do you personally stay so present while looking ahead? It's something that I personally struggle with myself. I try to look ahead, but then I also remember, okay, this is what it feels like right now. And is it a constant toggling back and forth, or is there a strategy you have there?
Yeah, I think it is a strategy. I think it's like, here we are right now, this is what I'm doing. When I'm speaking to my children, unless it's like, let's say, for example, I'm finishing an email that really has to happen in work, and one of my girls comes in my office, I'll say, just give me a second, let me finish this. But let's say we're sitting in the car and we're visiting and talking, and when you have teenagers, that's when you hear everything. So you just sit there and you let them tell you, because they will. That is the prime time with your teenagers, is in the car driving. And so it's like, be totally present. When I go into my office and sit there, they're gone. I'm not anyone's mother at that moment. I mean, of course I'm their mother and I'm there, but it's sort of understanding, don't let it all bleed through your whole life. Designate either spaces or times that it's like, this is what I'm doing. Now, that's not to say that sometimes something doesn't jump into an envelope. You're heading to a gathering with your family and there's an emergency at work. You just go, hey guys, a few minutes, I got to deal with this. But it's really creating soft boundaries all the time. And when you're with your partner, it's like, no, I'm with you. And I'll even be mindful not to talk about my daughters with my husband. We can just be like two people visiting, not be like, well, blah, 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 this happened and she did this or that. It's like, no, it's you and I right now. So it's even trying to be conscious of that.
It's interesting you mentioned that about, my wife and I, we have our date nights, and we end up finding a lot of times we had to correct ourselves because we would just be talking about the kids. And that becomes, although it's wonderful because you do have to have this sort of family CEO time, where you have to, like, that you can't do when the kids are around. But there's also this time where you have to say, hey, no, I'm giving 100% of my effort to you right now. And in the world of trying to multitask, it doesn't work. Like, if you just give 100% of your effort at one, maybe it's 2 minutes, but it's 100% of your effort. That the total fractionated time, that's going to make a lot more sense than trying to let it bleed over and trying to talk to my son while also sending an email and giving him a half-assed version of myself.
Right. It's very powerful. I have a husband who's very good at this. It's sort of like, give me 5 minutes of straight like this. And like, if you say to Laird, hey, I need to talk to you about something, it's like, he's there. Yeah. And so what happens is, I'm good. I don't need a lot of attention or time, because I feel seen and heard, and I try to bring that to my children. And if I can't do that in the moment, I honor them and say, hey, listen, this is super important. I got to finish. I'm interested. Or they call you and you say, I hear you. Give me a second. So it's sort of just the constant acknowledgement. It doesn't mean be perfect. It doesn't mean that stuff's not getting crazy and overwhelming and you don't, boff it from time to time. But it's just being conscious and not trying to be 100% of the things 100% of the time, because it just doesn't work.
If we take that same conversation and we flip it on its head to, let's say, difficult things, and sort of, I call it almost micro-dosing stressors, right? I mean, XPT is all about sort of exposing people to maybe experiences, but also just sort of flirting with like an area they haven't been with before, like whether it's struggle in the water or another context is just even some of the workouts where there was just no time limit, right? I loved that, or no, not a time limit, but a time cap, right? It was just like, you're just gonna go as long as you can go. I love that kind of stuff because that's just in my wheelhouse. But some people really, really struggled with that versus in the water they flourished, right? It shows a lot about different character types. Nothing good, bad, or ugly about it. It's just the way that it is and probably people's experiences. But when you expose yourself to these hard things, people think, okay, I have to do this a certain way. It's going to be a system and a process. How do you do that, in this day and age? Because you're always kind of refining yourself, but you're not in this optimization strategy where you're trying to, I don't know if that question makes sense. Like, how do you find that? How do you allow yourself to have the proper exposure to hard things?
You're asking, why am I training? Because it's not like I have volleyball anymore, and yet I'm still doing all this hard stuff. And so what I would say, I've always said this, I'm training for life. And so for people who go, for example, why would I sit in a sauna, in a 200-degree sauna, or go in an ice tub, or do exercises I don't like? It's because I look at all of that as a way, when we talk about high performance, how I can be high performance in all of the buckets of my life. And what I tell people is, for example, I get a lot of ex-athletes, and they're either hurt or they aged out and they're done. But I always remind them, listen, you're sort of a loaded gun. You just have to pick your next target. And reminding people that we have this opportunity through training. So, and I include nutrition, obviously. I mean, it's really one of the biggest pieces in all of it, is that I'm doing it because this represents to me showing up at the highest level in my life. And I use these tools, because that's what they are, to make me better. And do I love it? When I see an ice plunge, I don't go, oh, I can't wait to get in the ice. I never have once, and I don't know that I ever will. It's always hard. But again, I've touched that curtain enough times to go, I'm gonna be okay. I just have to get through that first 30 seconds. I'll use my 7-second in and 7-second out, and before I know it, I'll be fine. And other days are easier than others, and I accept that too. But I think it's realizing that if you have access to these tools, number one, you're really fortunate. And these are ways, if people want to hack their way into anything, I do look at these as ways that they're supportive hacks, but hacks that you actually have to do. So that's what motivates me, and also honoring myself and flexing that muscle still. I would like to be a person that, no matter my age or the time in my life or what I need the performance for, that I'm somebody who's willing to do something that's uncomfortable. And if it can be positive stress versus negative stress, like an argument or something really heavy is going on in life, I'll take it all day long.
That's one thing I've talked about, on my channel numerous times as well, is that relationship with stress. What is it? Angela Duckworth's research on that, like your perception of stress really is everything. And like, it's such a fine line between physiologically what's happening with eustress versus distress. Like, it's very similar things, same catecholamine responses, but how you dwell on it and what happens in the moment, but more importantly, like post-acute, after an argument or after an ice bath, for example. After an ice bath, you walk out of that and you say, I did something good for myself.
Right.
After an argument, you are typically not feeling good, right? So it's that post-acute setting that matters. And it's just like that with any kind of trauma, right? When you go into the gym, it's trauma to a certain degree. How you treat that trauma and how you perceive that trauma is everything. But if I went to your leg and I hit it with a meat tenderizer a bunch of times and I was really mean about it, you'd probably be like, this was horrible. Like, I'm not going to recover from this. What did he do? It's very, very similar physiologically in a way, as far as the stress response is concerned.
Well, and I always say, I believe you can't get away from it, right? And life is going to hand us surprises that are really uncomfortable. Those are the real things in life, especially with a loved one or our own health or something. So if there's an opportunity to seek out these positive stressors and stay tuned up and stay adaptable and resilient, so then when life's coming at you, I think the organism functions better. And I also think I'd like to pay a little each day. So with hard work and maybe not eating, that big baguette that I want to have. Who doesn't like a good baguette, right? And sort of navigate my personal relationships with trying to be as emotionally sort of sound as I can be versus reactive. Then maybe I pay with that choice. I'm exercising, I'm flexing that muscle, versus you kind of blowing through your life, you're not really paying, and then all of a sudden I feel like you're going to get something big. And so there's another part of me that's like, how do I seek out, embrace, and appreciate these uncomfortable positive stresses that also keep me tuned up for the big stuff so I can show up better in my life. And also, I hate to say it, but like not get soft. That's the other thing is I want to know myself for real. And sometimes the only way to do that is to be in those uncomfortable situations where it's like, I don't want to do this. And I go, great, take a deep breath, let's go.
Yeah, the more that you can face those I don't want to do this situations, the more that you're ready to tackle the big moments that come into your life.
Yeah.
And taking those moments and being able to say, wow, either my training has been working or I need to adjust something, right? I use my own example again with my wife and her head injury. I wasn't real happy with how I reacted because I kind of flew off the handle, upset with the horse, upset with the situation. In retrospect, I look at that and I say, okay, where do I need to change my mindset training? Where do I need to change my breathwork practice? Because I was not pleased with how I even internally reacted, how I felt the turmoil versus usually I'm pretty cool. Now, when something happens to a loved one, it can rattle you, right? And I know you're granted some slack there, but the point is like, those are the big things. So you can't just grant yourself slack all the time. Otherwise you're gonna say like the next big thing, okay? A family member's gonna get cancer or something like that. No, I wanna be able to remain cool so that I can keep track of the things that matter, take care of my family. And I think being able to recognize your failures and being able to accept that and then adjust your training, ad hoc appropriately is really, really important when you're training for life, so to speak.
But let me push on that a little bit. So let's say you were standing right there when the thing was going down with your wife and the horse. I would put money down that you would have reacted exactly correctly. You would have grabbed the horse or grabbed her or done something. You weren't standing right there.
Correct. Yeah.
So there's a kind of emotional afterflow that I do think we have to feel because we are human. You're protective of her. And so I think there's dual. I think in the moment, make the right decision. That's what the other stressors are for. But I also think as a human being, as somebody who loves their wife deeply and maybe had thoughts and feelings about the horse, let's say, I don't know, right? That we look at that and we say, oh yeah, so next time when I get that feeling or that voice, I might honor it a little more. Or it's also a thing sometimes, maybe your wife goes like, wow, my guy he really cares about me. And you don't realize that showing that offness and that humanness also lets the people around you know, like, you really care. So I think it's both.
Yeah, definitely is. And then the physical side of it, being able to physiologically like tolerate the stressors that come at you with that, I didn't get rattled from a couple nights of poor sleep, right? as much as I sit here from my high horse saying, like, talking about how important sleep is, the bottom line is you can build a certain level of sleep resiliency too by being a healthy, metabolically adaptable person. So when I go 2 nights without sleeping, I'm not completely broken. Is it healthy? Is it great? No. But I can still function because my body can metabolically thrive. And those are exactly the kinds of things that, like, when we focus only on the optimization and we forget about the big picture of training for life, like, that's exactly what we lose sight of, is the ability to be able to handle the big things that really make us who we are as humans.
Yeah, because I'm looking at you right now, it's a few days after, you look fine, you don't look tired, you have all these things. So I think that that's a really important point. You know, do you know Mark Carboni?
Yes.
He does the breather, right? Yep. Okay, so I asked him a question about using the breather and why did you use it and this and that. And he goes to me, and he's very type A, you know,
Yep.
right? So he says, some days, Gabby, I can only just get the sigh out. Like, so it's really also important for people to go, give me the information and I know what to do, but it's also goes back to that grace. You're a human being that's going to go through things. Now, if you let it go too long, okay, course correct. But there's something to be said for nobody's got it dialed.
Yeah.
We're just still doing the best we can. And that's really important for people to remember without making that the excuse.
Now, if we come back a little pivot, but still kind of on the breathwork piece, I wanted to ask you, was breathwork always a practice for you, even pre-Laird? Because I know Laird's been big on it for a while. Or so is this something that you learned with Laird? And if so, like, what was the transformation like from that? Because trying to explain to people on the internet the importance of breath work, you sound like a weirdo until they try it, right? And I was that way. I was just kind of like, yeah, it's important. I know oxygen's important, but understanding the state shift that can happen. So this is something that was relatively foreign to you then.
Yeah, I mean, of course you learn probably intuitively how to downregulate when you're competing. You go through a tough, long rally and you learn how to downregulate. I wish I knew what I know today then. And when we do XPT, for example, my favorite are the VC guys and the finance guys from New York and Boston when you start talking about breathing, because they look at you out of the side of their head like, oh, okay, we're going to breathe. And they're the ones that have the most dramatic response. Like, I really felt something. It's like, you think? So it is an interesting thing where most of us, it's natural, it's free, it's the essence of life. It's, you know, hopefully a way to keep anxiety and depression and stress and disease at bay. It increases performance. It does all these things. Most of us are doing it wrong. So I was turned on to it, kind of funny enough, originally through Wim Hof. So we met Wim, and then it was sort of like, oh, interesting. Then we met Patrick McCune, the Oxygen Advantage. And so that gave me information, data. You know, Patrick is like, this is what's happening. He talked about the BOLT score, your intolerance to CO2, and how a lot of athletes are metabolically sort of inefficient in that way. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And you test your own score and you go, wow, I could do a lot better. And so I sort of got led into it that way. And Laird has a different relationship with it because he's really interested in air, breathing. Coming from a water sport, that's everything. And then just seeing how I could downregulate myself just by breathing, not going, I really need to calm down. By just slowing it down, longer exhales than inhales, doing it for 2-3 minutes and being like, oh, I feel better. So I think for me, I came to it late. I don't practice it all the time, but I'm certainly more aware of it. Even the idea of your jaw structure, your teeth health, all of this stuff that goes along with breathing. And that's why I think when you look at people who practice like Ashtanga yoga, who have these heavy breathing practices, that's kind of what they're talking about, and it's all of that. So if you're talking to people on the internet, I don't even know that the science dump is so important. Talking about the relationship of CO2 and oxygen and all of that. If they need it, you have it. But it's just getting them those really basic cues, like close your mouth and try to slow it down. I also always loved the fact of when they said the average American is sort of taking, I think, 15 to 22 breaths per minute. And really, if we could get to about 5 or 7, that's better. And just those kinds of things where you say to people, just try that.
It's an interesting point. And when I'm in an ice bath, it's amazing how, well, first of all, the time dilation that can come with proper breath work, for one, but that's beside the point. But yeah, I mean, you first get in and you're practically hyperventilating. You're just breathing rapidly. But then everything slows down and you start realizing, like when I actually count my breaths, if I'm doing 3 or 4 minutes, I'm getting like 12 big breaths. I mean, it's like, and you get out of that thing feeling fully oxygenated, feeling amazing. And part of me wonders is, okay, is this the effect of the cold or is it the effect of the forced, methodical, slow breathing that's happening? If I'm getting 10 or 12 breaths in a 3-minute period, that's pretty dang low. But, and that just forces it to happen that way. And I think that a lot of people learn, for me, I learned that diaphragmatic triggering when I'm in the cold, because it's the only time that I can find myself almost forced to breathe that way. Because if I try breathing, accessory breathing through here, everything tightens up, right?
Yep.
So typically, like my advice for people that are trying to get into breathwork and trying to understand, or people that have just struggled with like learning those cues for the diaphragm and the breathing that way, is try doing it in cold water.
Yep.
It's just like training, like I say with fasting is nutrition with a weight vest. Training with a weight vest is literal training with a weight vest. Cold exposure is breath work with a weight vest, because everything's constricted and you train yourself and it becomes very autonomic.
Yep. And then really other fun cheater that I learned years ago from Belisa Vranich, she does a lot of breathing. If people are really beginners, is to lay on the floor and just take their index finger and put it below their belly. And a lot of people, they do all this like shrugging breathing, right? Because they can't get the big round breath, the horizontal, so they're always vertical breathing. Is even if you can't get the breath down into the diaphragm, by putting it there, I always say, when you inhale, just push out your belly to your finger, because all of a sudden they'll start to connect the diaphragm with the breath. And that's a really good starter for a lot of people who, if they don't have access to cold, is to lay down and just do that for a song. Put a song on and just push out, and try to do it always in expansion. So dropping the belly button to the spine and just doing that. And all of a sudden they'll start to be like, oh, I feel that diaphragm. And so that was always a really easy, great cue for me, for a lot of people who couldn't get it way down in there, especially women, because we're taught to suck it in, hold it, tighten, flatten. And so just to let it be. Yeah.
So many years of fitness modeling and doing that with me too. Always like,
just
being in a flex, right? Always like flexing the abs, and you realize you're breathing from here.
Oh, it's great. And I don't know why I'm so high strung, it's like great, A volleyball, you get hyper developed in your obliques from hitting balls. And everyone's like, that's great. And you're like, yeah, but that's actually not functional. So let me tell you.
No, it's definitely, and I mean, it's again, very powerful metaphor overall for life when you look at that. It's just like sometimes being in those zones where you have to be on all the time is not exactly natural. It's not exactly what we're set out to be doing, right? Looking what looks perfect physiologically, what looks perfect on camera is definitely not always. You look at people that can breathe and they're never standing there with their abs flexed. And a lot of times they have these big rib cages that have expanded so much because they can breathe like that. And, in the context of bodybuilding or fitness modeling, you'd look at that and you'd say, oh, that person, they look at them, their obliques aren't showing, they're not tight. This is like, it's complete opposite of what is actually functional and actually healthy.
Right. That is so true. You've got to be cinched down.
No, it's the exact opposite. Well, Gabby, I want to be respectful of your time. Where can everyone find you?
Oh, well, you mentioned XPT many times, so xptlife.com, or Gabby Reece, Reece. I have a podcast, The Gabby Reece Show, where I talk about different versions of this type of things, because I'm so interested in performance. But I really appreciate the conversation, and I think it's really important for people to realize that they can have all the information or just give me the data, but if they don't understand actually how to develop the practice that reflects who they are, the way you do it and the way I do it is going to be reflective of each of us, and it's different. But to encourage people to kind of take that adventure and develop it themselves, because a lot of times it's like, well, just tell me what to do. It's like, you deal with this with nutrition. Well, what foods do you actually even like? Let's start there. And so a lot of people don't take the time to go like, well, would I rather exercise outside or inside? What are things that excite me, and encourage them just to build that practice as an extension of who they are, because then they'll actually do it.
No, very, very true. And being able to understand that adherence truly is 90% of the battle, and that the rest is really just minutia until you get to that next level, and just finding out what makes you happy, and also just move, period. Yeah,
and what makes you happy, because nothing reeks worse than somebody who's perfectly fit, eats perfectly, and you can tell that they are so scared because they are afraid of whatever, getting old, not being ripped.
Yeah.
They don't have loved ones. And I think that the life part really supports us in a way that being perfectly fit and eating perfect can't. So just the balance.
Yeah. That's well said, because I think the words that I would use to describe both you and Laird is you truly embody your practice, and it shows.
Thanks.
Right? And that is, it doesn't matter what that looks like on the outside, because there's different seasons for everything. But what matters is that always shines true. What you guys talk about and what you guys live, you can see that is your moral compass, that is who you are. And there's like a light that comes with that you can't really put your finger on. It's just there.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that with both you and Laird, and literally can count on one hand the amount of people I know in life that actually embody their practice that way.
Thank you.
And
it's imperfect. Okay?
that's the beauty of it, though.
It's totally imperfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, as always, keep it locked in the channel, and thanks,
Thank you.
Gabby.
Thank you.